Hey, Mike, you're all set.
Okay, good morning. Welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 9 a.m. Stephanie, would you please take attendance?
First, good morning, everyone. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman has not joined us yet. Ellen McKitterick,
Present.
Alice Pritchard,
Present.
Mike Soltis,
Present?
and Holly Williams will not be joining us. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I would like to welcome and thank the members of the public for joining us this morning. I'd like to ask the committee for a review of the November 7 minutes and for a motion to approve those minutes. I have a motion to approve.
I moved.
Second?
I'm going to have to abstain because I wasn't here last month.
You can still second, even though you'll be abstaining on the vote.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstaining.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. This next item on the agenda is the update on private plan renewals. Michael, will you please lead us in that discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. And good morning, everybody. Stephanie, would you be able to allow me to share my screen?
You should be able to share.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Can folks see a PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you so much. So this is the slide that I shared last month in this committee meeting. It was sort of the current status of the 230 plans that were initially approved in the first quarter of 2021. All of our private plans are approved for a 3-year period, which means that those plans beginning on January 1st, 2021 will expire at the end of this year. It is the largest batch of approved private plans. It was sort of the most economically advantageous approval was that early batch, so it's no surprise. I had gone over a little bit about the communication efforts we made in sort of the past 6 months to sort of let them know your plans are expiring, you need to take action. So this is the status we were at a month ago, with a little less than half plans had told us what they wanted to do, and about half were still waiting on those responses. This next slide is where we are today. So actually as of yesterday, same number of expiring plans. There's about 167 that have told us what they want to do. The vast majority have renewed and been approved for that new 3-year period. There's now 25 that have told us they're coming back to the public program. And then we have a couple that are still in pending status. We have to review them, and we believe we'll be able to get those approved before January 1st. And there's one plan that told us that they were terminated because the whole company shut down. Unfortunately, it does leave 63 that we have not approved nor received confirmation that they intend to come back to the public program. Some of those, 6 of them, have asked for an extension, and we did grant that because they do intend to renew. They just needed to have more time to vote. And we sort of feel like the voting process, it's more important to follow the voting process than it is to make sure you hit that December 1st deadline that we initially had. So we did grant extensions to 6, and we expect those to renew. We also have 14 accounts that we have some indication that they may not exist anymore. Either the company closed entirely, or maybe they were acquired and merged with another entity. Most of that indication came from carriers themselves when we had reached out to them, either about this process or maybe about refunds that we were potentially issuing, or the annual report previously we had submitted information about. So there's maybe 20 that we think they may not exist, or sorry, maybe 20 of these 63 that aren't an issue, 14 of which may no longer exist. And then there's one case that asked us about how to terminate, but we haven't actually received the confirmation that they intend to terminate. So that still is about 42 plans that we don't know what's going on with them. Which isn't ideal, but given we started with 230, and this is sort of, we've experienced this in the past, some difficulty communicating with these employers. I'm not surprised. As far as next steps, essentially coverage needs to be available to employees of these employers as of January 1st. And because their private plan is expiring, any plans that have not responded by January 1st, we are going to consider them part of the public program. We will attempt any applications that come in late, even though we are past the deadline. We do intend to, if at all possible, approve them and renew their plans, but sort of we need to make sure that they're submitting those. We have communication that we're planning on sending on December 15th. This is to all plans that are coming back to the public program, both the ones that have told us they want to come back and anyone that we have not heard from at all. Essentially welcome them back, giving them high-level details about what to expect under the public program. For example, like when contributions are due, brief overview of the claims process, and sort of what they need to tell their payroll TPA, that type of information. We're hopeful that maybe this is the last opportunity for those plans that never told us what they intended to do to realize this is real, it's actually happening, you're now part of the public program. However, in the meantime, we're also going to be doing some analysis, my team is, to try and do more research into each employer and try and figure out, Google them, see if we can find their website. Are they still active? Is there anything else out there that shows that maybe they're required? We're going to also look at, maybe we can find some trends as to the type of employers that didn't respond. Maybe they're related to each other, and it's sort of, we do know some entities, there's, subsidiaries and, parent companies that are related, and maybe they submitted an application for one, but not the other. So it's just a mix up on the record keeping and what they submitted to us. And then we're going to see if we can find any other contacts for the company to reach out about. Less likely that they'll be able to get there if they really truly have no idea that they needed to renew. There's not enough time to sort of submit their application. So this communication may simply be, you're going to be part of the public program for at least a quarter. Make sure your employees are aware as of January 1st, who to submit their claims to. So that's sort of the next steps. The numbers aren't great, but also sort of this is what we've seen in the past for, responding to the annual reports. We're going to get better. We're hope it would have been better if this was the smallest batch of employers with private plans, so we could sort of test run, learn from our mistakes, learn better ways to communicate. But unfortunately, it was the largest batch. So happy to take any questions if anyone has any suggestions on other steps we want to take for these plans. Love to hear them.
All right, any questions or comments for Michael? Okay, I have one question, Michael. Do we have access?
Sorry, Mike. I think Alice had her hand raised.
Oh, go
I
ahead,
just
Alice.
wanted
I'm
to-
sorry. Go ahead.
No, thanks, Mike. Michael, I just wanted to ask, is there, do we have the flexibility to, again, from one of those 40 companies, it's like, oh my God, I didn't know. Do you have the ability to give them an extension to January 15th? Are we limited in how far we can take them and therefore they have to go on the plan? It just feels like a lot of back and forth if we get them on the plan and then they get their act together. Just wondering how much flexibility we have to avoid that back and forth. I appreciate all the work that's been done to get them where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I agree. We don't want them to have to come back to the public plan just because they, maybe their contact left the company and they didn't receive the communication we were sending. If truly their intent is to remain private and their employees want to remain private, sort of we understand that intent. I think we can grant that exception under extreme cases. What we need to confirm is sort of what's happening on January 1st to any of those claimants who have a claim, they want to file. Making sure that there's someone willing to take that in. And from, if it's an insurance company and the effective date, so we don't get the approval until after January 1st, we need that confirmation from the insurance company. Yes, we're willing to insure your plan back in time, even though it technically wasn't enforced at that time. So there's probably a couple extra steps we have to do. And obviously, if while they're figuring it out, someone files a claim, we're going to pay that claim under the public program, assuming it's they're eligible and they submit all the documents. And then we have to figure out, do they reimburse us for that, or do they just stay, public for a quarter? I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world to be under the public plan for a single quarter and then, go private on April 1st. But then again, we know that's not necessarily the intent of a lot of these employers.
To add to that, although we're willing to hear sort of really good, detailed, very well explained extreme circumstances, it's not the standard. We can't really be in a situation where we're prorating because we have told the rest of the world that December 1st was the deadline. So you really have to be super careful about making any exceptions. So we're always open to hearing, but we're not going to just sort of willy-nilly make exceptions without really strong justification. So it's because there's been a lot of work. We didn't start the outreach, last week. We started this outreach in June.
All right, any other questions, comments? I have one question for you, Michael. I know we have some sort of agreements with some other state agencies for sharing information. Do we have access or do we, I'm thinking about Department of Revenue Services, and are these, to find out if these entities are still existing, are they generating income? Are they paying taxes? Do we have access to that information?
Yes, absolutely. So we have MOUs, memorandum of understanding, with DRS and DOL, both of which involve what they're paying in taxes for UI purposes or for income purposes. And so we can review that. What I want to do is double check those MOUs to make sure that when we made that agreement, that we didn't limit what we could use that for. I suspect we can use it for this. It's about eligibility and sort of does involve contributions, but the original intent of those agreements was about sort of contributions under the public program and confirming that what they were paying us was the same sort of wage base that they were paying for UI purposes. So I think that's a good source to go to, and we will check that as long as it's allowed according to our MOU.
Right.
So even when it's allowed, it's still a little bit tricky because companies don't always affirmatively report their status in a timely fashion to either DOL or DRS. So, sometimes they just ghost everybody. And so that adds a level of complexity to just sort of validating status. Because even though there is an official process for notifying the state when you close, lots of companies just figure that if they just stop paying, we'll figure it out eventually, which is not the way it's supposed to happen.
And just one last question, and I know your presentation was about renewals, but do we have any employers who through 23 have been in the public plan, but have now indicated for 24 they want to have a private plan?
Yes, and that's sort of happening on a quarterly basis. And talk about perfect storm. Besides this being the largest batch of expiring private plans, January 1st tends to be the quarter in which the most plans want to go private for the first time. Just a lot of people make benefit changes on January 1st. So this ends up being, we did receive a lot of applications for the first time. That just meant, Kathy and my team had renewing plans and brand new plans to review at basically the same time. Those deadlines were much more strict. December 1st is the deadline for that. We were a little bit more lenient in granting extensions for the renewing, but brand new ones need to be approved a month in advance of the effective date.
So
Okay,
Ava has her
thank
hand
you.
up.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. Of course, just
Ava?
now when I ask the question, the dog starts barking. I was wondering, Michael, if you can remind us if they are not compliant for a set amount of time, what is our next step? What is fines? What's our recourse?
Yeah, so sort of this is the worst case scenario, but it might be likely. Any employers who, if we have bad contact information, if they've moved and their contact information is no longer valid, and we're going to say they're back in the public program for the first quarter of 2024, they may not realize it until second quarter when we issue a penalty for failing to remit contributions to us for that first quarter. We do have a process there. We send potential electronic notices or physical mailed notices. That may be the first time they realize it, and there are penalties attached to that. We have penalties as well for sort of late notice of your intent to terminate, which could include no notice. However, I'm trying as much as possible to waive those penalties because we understand, the last time some of these groups maybe heard from us was 3 years ago when they initially were approved. We have been sending notices, but if those contact information is out of date, they may have gotten it. So we're trying to be generous with the penalty for late notice, but we ultimately can't be too generous with the contribution requirement because now they are covered under the public program. And we do want to make sure that's uniform across the board for all employers. but I hope we don't get there. I'm hoping we can make contact. It's a small enough segment, the 40-ish that we have, that maybe our research and alternate contacts, maybe we're going to literally submit requests through their websites. Hey, we're trying to get in touch with you. Is there a contact we can reach out to in your HR department? And I'm hopeful by the end of the first quarter, we've squared away these accounts.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Michael. We'll move to the next item, which is a discussion about the CEO performance evaluation process, and Aaron and I will lead that discussion. Aaron, you want to start off?
Sure, thank you, Michael. So just to level set, 2 years ago, the board did a performance evaluation of Andrea, which I did not participate in, but my belief is that it was relatively informal. But we certainly don't have a process in place. Last year, Andrea was leaving and I was coming on board, so there was no performance evaluation done. So we kind of realized we really need a process in place. Fran was kind enough to share the process that WBDC has recently adopted following work with a consultant. And so we had looked at that and thought that would be a really good base. I did reach out to some of our sister quasis to see what they do, and it runs the gamut from completely informal to, to just the chairperson of the board doing an evaluation kind of on their own of the CEO, to things similar to what Fran's process or the WBDC process is. So we thought that the WBDC process, which we shared with you by email yesterday, would be a good foundation for us, which enables us to set a time frame for setting, annual goals at the beginning of the calendar year, and then at the end of the calendar year. So the evaluation process encompasses sort of the self-report from the CEO, as well as sort of input from others. One thing that I think this WBDC process doesn't include that we would like to include would be kind of identifying who amongst the board would conduct the evaluation, but also making sure that those who are not part of the evaluation team get input from other members of the board so that everyone has an opportunity to participate, even if the evaluation itself isn't done by a cast of thousands.
Let me add a few comments. So this issue arose, you may recall, at the last month's meeting. Aaron reported on compensation adjustments and noted that she or her team had done the review of the staff. And the question was asked, well, what about the CEO's review? So what we are contemplating is this is not just for Aaron. This is a process that we would adopt and would use on an ongoing basis. Certainly we could adjust it as necessary, but this is not a just for this year. This is on an ongoing basis. The timeline in the document, so goal setting January 31, you shouldn't pay any attention. Well, the purpose of today's discussion is to raise the issue, discuss the issue, have you think about it prior to the next meeting in January, at which point we would hopefully be in a position to recommend to the board, here's the process we recommend. Okay, so today is just a discussion to bring the issue up. Because of that, the time frames on this document won't work for this year, okay? Because we're going to be into January and February. So for 24, we'll have our own time frame, but on a go-forward basis, it would be nice to have kind of a calendar for this review. Certainly, if you want to review the performance evaluation, the entries, I mean, this is great that Fran had just done this with a compensation consultant, but we could certainly tweak it to make it more applicable to us. It's not etched in stone. So if you want to review it between now and next week and send your comments to Aaron, I guess we should have them sent to.
Mhm.
Then we can, revisit that at the next meeting. But the idea is to, just as we have a routine evaluation for everyone else, to have a routine evaluation for the CEO. Any questions or comments? I assume there's a consensus, everybody thinks it's a good idea to have a process in place, right? As opposed to not. And I think the sense was getting the entire board together in a room and say, all right, what do you think about Andrea is not the best practice, right? So we'll try to improve upon that. Probably anything we do will improve upon that.
So it looks like Alice has her hands raised.
Yes, I
Agrees.
see,
Yeah.
Alice.
Thank you. So I just want to, I would concur that I think it's important that we do it formally, that it's transparent. So if asked, we can tell people how we have evaluated the CEO. Appreciate Fran for sharing the model she just went through. I like both the self-evaluation, but also the manager evaluation. I think that balance is really important. I think it looks really good. I guess my question is really more about the fact that we've hung the CEO's compensation to this evaluation process. And if we're not going to kind of get it going until the middle of next year, I'm concerned that Aaron hasn't been given consideration for, an increase since she started, and that we would be extending that. Is that correct, Aaron?
So just to clarify, I did get the COLA in the spring, which I think is fine. I think that's sufficient. Since the COLA is sort of applicable to kind of anyone employed with the state, that kind of fits. But I appreciate that concern, and I think, if I hadn't gotten that, I might have had a different opinion. But I think it's fine to kind of get the process in place and then worry about anything other than a COLA, kind of in context of the performance evaluation in the end of next.
So are we thinking in terms of a timeline for this year, are we thinking we would do this by March or something like that? In which case, then I'm with you 100%. I just want to make sure it's not all the way to next December before we've given you some feedback on performance and let you goal set, et cetera.
Well, I mean, from my view, we're hopeful. If we could make a recommendation in January to the board that this would be in place either probably February, have the evaluation, hopefully in the first quarter. I mean, that's kind of my thought. Maybe that's a little optimistic, but it shouldn't slip much beyond that. And I do have a question on the compensation. Since I'm more of a private sector guy than a state guy, can increases be retroactive?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it has been done. That's a fairly common thing in state
Okay,
government.
so that's an option available to us, to the board. And that is the second discussion, who makes the recommendation, and I think that has to come formally from the board, right? Makes the recommendation for an adjustment. So at least at this point, we're focused on the first piece, the evaluation, self-evaluation, board input, and then we'll get to the second. Hopefully,
Mike, if I could, before I see the floor entirely, I think I do think it would be good to have a small group who does the evaluation, gaining input from the full board, but not a full board kind of engaged process. So I might recommend that it's this committee. It seems in keeping with this committee doing the work, but making sure to get feedback, or we could ask for a committee, specifically in January when we pass the, and it could rotate from year to year, but I would suggest a small group and then soliciting input from the full board.
Yep. Yeah, that's what's contemplated, and certainly Fran would be a part of that, right? So, okay, any other questions or comments, observations?
Looks like Ellen's got her hand raised.
Just a comment, would it make sense, or comment/question, would it make sense to have or to invite the other committee chairs to be a part of the evaluation process? Because Erin's working kind of across the
Mm.
scope of, the different areas of responsibility. And so I imagine that some of the other committee chairs might have feedback on Erin's performance in some of those other areas that this committee doesn't often, get into the weeds of. So just a thought in terms of who might be the appropriate person to kind of, or the appropriate group rather, to kind of do that evaluation before, bringing it to the full board.
What do we have? 3 committees? We have Finance and Audit, our committee.
Outreach.
And then
Outreach.
outreach. Technically, we have the executive committee, which consists of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary, but that meets only on an ad hoc basis and really was most necessary in the 6 months before we had a CEO, because they set the board meeting agendas. So that really hasn't met in quite a long time. So really, we have 3.
And can you remind us, there's the open meeting requirements and performance evaluations, where those fit, how those.
So if there's a quorum of either the full board or of any committee, then it has to be a public meeting. So, so as long as you sort of stay under the quorum level, if it was sort of people who are simply made up of policy and personnel, for example, then, you'd have a quorum with whatever it is, 3 or 4, I've lost track. But if you had people who were not all in the same committee, and we just kind of did it ad hoc, as not an official committee, just sort of an assignment from the chairperson, I think then you don't have a quorum, so it doesn't have to be public. Alternatively, you could kind of lean in on the FOIA side of it. You would notice that the meeting is occurring, so that there's a public meeting, but then they would immediately go into an executive session to discuss, in the context of the executive session, any decisions have to be made out of the executive session, but the discussion can be done in executive session. So there's ways of doing it. It's just the size of like, if we decide it's sort of like an evaluation and compensation committee, then I think we go in with its FOIA and it's a public meeting. If it's just an assignment, for 2 or 3 people, then I think it's sort of just like any other kind of time that any one of us meets with some small couple of you from the board where it's not a meeting.
Okay. All right, any other questions, comments,
Ava?
observations?
Just a comment. The one thing that I would add, in addition to the proposed plan that WBDC is implementing for themselves, is a staff component. Either something anonymous and informal where they can chime in regards to Erin's performance with all the staff, or if we want to do a little bit more simpler and easier, the direct people that she supervises in leadership positions, again, anonymous or feedback. Another option would be if we want to do it more formal, the direct people that she supervises in leadership positions could be part of the committee conversations and like informal interviews about her performance to help us really gauge how she's doing.
Okay,
I
interesting.
think Fran's proposal includes a 360 for the direct reports. So which is not something I've experienced, so we would need to kind of put some clarity around what that looks like. But I think you're right. it's helpful to have that impact from the day-to-day folks.
It'd be interesting how that would, what our timeline would look like with, you know, with that step. Again, just thinking about my first quarter, a little bit of slippage, not a lot of slippage, but good point. Okay. So we got a few things to think about before next month's meeting, and ideally we would come out of that meeting with a recommendation.
So what I can do is I can follow up with Fran on the 360 component just to get more details
Yeah.
on that. And if they don't have it, we can find it. I know it's a pretty common thing in private sector. And I can share that just as distribution of information via email is not a meeting. So I can share that.
Yeah.
But then if anyone has feedback, send it back to me. I can compile it, share it with Mike. But we won't do reply alls so that we don't engage in virtual meetings.
If you could get Fran's feedback on the composition of who meets with the CEO, that would be helpful too.
Yep.
Okay, anything else on that broad topic, any aspect of it? I suppose we ought to have for January at least some idea of what a timetable would look like, right? Assuming something's approved, recommended in January, February board meeting, do we get all this done by the end of March, or is that not feasible, right? We ought to have a credible timeline to work toward.
I can put that together
Yeah.
for you,
All right.
sort
I
of
think
as
this is
part of
good-
this
Good project
sharing of information.
for us. All right, anything else on that? Okay, thank you for that discussion. We will move to the next agenda item, any old business to discuss? Nothing, any new business to discuss? Okay, seeing nothing, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it is 9:31 and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
good holiday season. We'll see you in January.
Yes, bye-bye.